Are you ready for a couple of graphs? Of course you are, because you're economists. All right, post-Keynesian economics. And I hit on accidentally doing this a different way a couple years ago and decided it worked much, much better. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off here not talking about schools of thought or anything like that, just introducing an economic analysis to you because I think that it actually introduces the whole concept in a much better way. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a labor market diagram. W is wage rate, N is the number of workers. Some economists use an L, I use an N because my professor in grad school did, so I got used to using N. So that's the number of workers. So this is the market for laborers. Here is N superscript S, or labor supply. That's the potential workers. That's the people that are offering their labor services. N superscript D, that's labor demand. That's the firms. The firms are demanding workers. Notice here that the higher the wage rate, the more there are people willing to work. But the higher the wage rate, the fewer workers firms are willing to hire. All right, so that's kind of the basic background here. Now, this is going to be what I'm going to call the classical version of how the labor market operates. And it's going to say that there is an automatic tendency towards full employment, so it's very similar to neoclassical, automatic tendency towards full employment, and nothing's going to stop us from getting there, all right? Auto tendency to, how close am I to the edge? Full emp and no obstacles. No obstacles to getting there. So, for example, let's lay out a situation here where something just fell down. Oh, there it is. Where we are not at full employment. Now, full employment is where everyone who wants a job has a job. And that is not true right here. Okay, this is a situation of involuntary unemployment. This many people would, let's start here. This many people would like to work. How do I know? At wage rate W sub 0, it hits the labor supply curve right here, drop down. Aha! The labor supply curve tells me how many people are willing to work at each wage rate. So at this wage rate, that many are willing. At this wage rate, however, firms are only willing to hire this many. So we've got some involuntary unemployment. Well, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. Because what's going to happen is, and let me see if I follow my notes here. Yeah, this is a disequilibrium situation, all right? A disequilibrium situation. Hey, let me illustrate that over to the right here. My time-honored example. I've been using this one for years. I'm sure people see it in their sleep, in their nightmares, after they finish John Harvey's class. All right, person A, B, C, and D, and let me add this equals parachute. Okay. Let's say we got 4 people at the Grand Canyon. There's a little bit of a glare right there, isn't there? I'll bet it's that one. No? Maybe it's the overhead light. Actually, did that fix it? Oh, yes, good. That was fortunate. All I had to do was move the monitor a little bit and it blocked off that light. Okay. Okay, 4 people go to visit the Grand Canyon. Person A, B, C, and D. And 2 of the poor devils slip and are falling to their deaths in the Grand Canyon. Of those 4 people, the only one that is not equilibrium, there's only one that's not equilibrium, there's only one that is disequilibrium, And that is the one that is both unhappy and able to delta, or able to change, all right? Able to change the circumstances that are making them unhappy. Only one of those four people is both unhappy and able to change the current circumstances. Now, presumably A and B are happy. I mean, they're not really happy because they're watching people fall to their deaths at the Grand Canyon, but maybe they're thinking, whoa, glad that wasn't me. And so we're going to assume they're happy. And C and D, we're going to assume they're so they're already in equilibrium. Doesn't matter whether they can do something or not, because it's irrelevant, because they're already happy. All right, they already got what they wanted. C and D, we're assuming, didn't mean to get that close to the edge, and they're falling to their deaths. All right, but the only one that represents disequilibrium, who on earth is that? Pardon me, it's from Arizona. Hello?
We've been you should have received some email about your car's extended warranty.
Okay.
Since we have not gotten a response, we are giving you a final courtesy call before we
I have a daughter that lives in Arizona, and that was, unless she has decided to start selling me extended warranties on my car, that wasn't her. All right, sorry for the interruption. Only one of these people is disequilibrium, and that's the one who is both unhappy and able to change, and of course that's C, the one with the parachute, all right? The one with the parachute can pull the ripcord and float gently into the Colorado River where they drown. But otherwise, A, B, and D are equilibrium. They are either happy, or, and these are the conditions for disequilibrium. Those are the conditions for disequilibrium. If you're not unhappy, then you're in equilibrium. But they're either happy, A, B, and D, or they're unhappy, but there's nothing they can do about it anyway. So those conditions that are making them unhappy will continue. Only person C is both unhappy and able to change the circumstances. So, let's go back to the graph. We got two groups here. We got the firms and the workers. Are firms unhappy? Well, let's have a look at it. At W sub 0, firms wanted to hire N sub 1 workers. Did they get N sub 1 workers? Well, yeah. As a matter of fact, they got their pick of workers. They're probably exceptionally happy because this many people showed up for the interview. They only wanted that many, so they're able to pick and choose a little bit. So, yeah, firms are happy. Firms are A or B. The workers are C or D. The workers are C or D, or at least this chunk of workers right here. Ooh. Because they did not get jobs. So, the story in this school of thought, the story here is, ready? They will compete with, let's see, I'll do this. Here's the people that did get jobs. Oh, whoops, sorry, I meant to, well, maybe they hate their job, but I meant to do a smiley face there. There's the people who did get jobs. So they say, oh, hey, I'll work for less than that. All right, because they need a job. So I'll work for less. So they'll compete with one another. Green. Comp et it ion. The competition between the unemployed and the employed will drive the wage rate down. Hey, I'm willing to work for less than that. And so as the wage rate comes down, so fewer people are willing to work. Some people say, well, screw it then. And the firm is saying, well, heck, we'll hire more people. Until we get to, let's just call it W sub 2, N sub 2. Full employment. So, don't worry. If there's a situation of involuntary unemployment, this school of thought, this approach, this classical approach says it'll fix itself. Now, why do I bring this up? Because of the Great Depression. And let me spout off some statistics here. Perhaps I'll even show them to you. Contending perspectives, PowerPoints and lectures, exam 2 material, Great Depression data. There they are. Yeah, I'll just show you this right now. Yeah. There's other things I want to show you later on this same PowerPoint. Let me just pick this up and hold it up there for a second. You may have heard that the period preceding the Great Depression was called the Roaring Twenties. It was an extremely strong expansion. And there's the data for the Roaring Twenties right there. There's a big level of unemployment in 21, and it's still pretty big in 22, but then after that, it really comes down. And on average, as you see there, I calculated on the right that average unemployment at the end of that Roaring Twenties was 4.24. Now, you're not going to believe what happens next. Okay, I want you to see that again. We're going to go from 3.2 and a 6% rate of GDP growth in 29 to 8.7, 15.9, 23.6, 24.9. This was an absolute disaster. It helped Hitler come to power. It helped spread fascism throughout the world. The horrible economic conditions led to extremist politics and people saying, I'll save you, don't worry. And people were desperate. So, let's say it's a Great Depression, and this is your model. What do you tell the government to do? Nothing. It'll be okay. Don't worry. It'll fix itself. All right. The Depression, as you saw just now, the high unemployment went on for a very long time. I mean, can you imagine if you graduated from college like in 1930? And it's not going to be until the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December of 41, because those unemployment rates are going to drop like a rock after that. They're going to go down to 1.9 during the war. But man, you graduate from college in 1930, you're like, hey, the world is my oyster. And then it's not. So anyway, that would really suck. So John Maynard Keynes, who wrote the General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, argued that's not how it works. He published his major work in 1936, and if you saw those numbers there, we got 1930 to 1941, and it was worse in England, and started earlier in England. Let's see, do I want that up there? I guess I could have left it up there now that I think about it. What did I have up there? I had auto tendency and no obstacle, right? Auto tendency and no obstacle. That was the classical view. They said, don't worry, be happy. It'll take care of itself. Keynes said, and Keynes had originally been one of those economists. Actually, he doesn't have an econ degree at all. But, I mean, his father was that's why they call him John Maynard Keynes. And then he went often by Maynard, is because his father was John Neville Keynes, already a famous economist. And so that kind of makes life difficult when you get started to say two Johns in the house, but actually that makes life convenient. So anyway, Keynes is writing during this period, and look, his book comes out in 36. Let me show you these data again. So, it's been going on for a while now. It's been really bad. Honestly, it's getting better, but, I mean, it's still catastrophic. And so Keynes is saying, oh my God, we've been looking at it wrong. Here's our problem. We've been misanalyzing the whole issue. It's not trying to fix itself. And here's what he has to say instead. So here's going to be Keynes. Let's see. And the post-Keynesian school of thought is based on what Keynes said. And I'll explain why they call themselves post-Keynesian here in just a little bit. All right, so here's what Keynes said instead. Or he didn't come right out and say this. To be honest with you, this is derivative of other work that people were his followers said. But this is the basic idea: demand curve, supply curve. And let's go ahead and start off with that terrible situation of W sub 0, N sub 0, N sub 1. So just like in the other situation, we've got some involuntary unemployment. So this is the Great Depression. We've got involuntary unemployment. Lots of unhappy people. But Keynes looks at it this way. He says, there's not two groups of people we're talking about here. Well, I kind of did that the last time too. But anyway, let's consider the three groups of people that are involved here. First, the firms. Are the firms happy or sad that they could get N sub 0 workers at W sub 0 wage rate? Well, just like with the previous scenario, no, that's what they wanted. At W sub 0, they wanted N sub 0 workers, so the firms are pleased. The firms got what they wanted, and in fact, they probably got their pick of employees. You know, they're able to take the person that's more experienced because they had so many applicants. These people are clearly unhappy. And there's no unemployment insurance, and there's no welfare during the Great Depression. So this is actually really catastrophic. We got 25% unemployment and no social safety net for these people. Nothing for them. And they didn't do anything wrong, as we'll argue here in a minute what actually caused the Great Depression. And so they're all very unhappy. What about the people who did get jobs? Well, as I showed you a moment ago, they're happy. In fact, they're probably ecstatic. How do you feel if you got a job during the Great Depression? Probably pretty good. And so these people are very happy. So the only people who could potentially create disequilibrium here are those people. But Keynes said they're like the person falling off the Grand Canyon that doesn't have the parachute. There's nothing they can do. They'd like to offer to work for less. To whom? Firms aren't hiring. They've got as many workers as they want. Do you not think that in the 1930s, people didn't go around offering to work for less? They absolutely did. People uprooted themselves and moved to other places. Hey, I hear there's jobs in California, and head out that way. But there weren't jobs in California. And firms were like, I got what I want. And plus, you're some unemployed person. Why do I want you? I've already got an employee. They're working out fine and so forth. Now, as people retired, would you potentially replace them with a cheaper new employee? Sure. As somebody got hurt on the job or fired, replace them. So there might be some downward pressure on the wage rate, but not much. Clearly not much, Keynes says. Clearly not much downward pressure, all right? Because it ain't moving. And it hasn't moved in a long time, or rather, it hasn't moved very significantly. You'd think that the bigger the unemployment, the more the competition would be, and the faster the rate would come down, right? But that's not happening. Keynes said it's because it's got nothing to do with wages. We are putting wages on the vertical axis when that's not really what's going on. That shouldn't be our focal point. I'll get into that in a minute, but let me explain this to you in the meantime. All right, so what Keynes is saying no automatic tendency. He said that automatic tendency towards full employment simply doesn't exist. So we're going to have to do something. It's not going to fix itself. The no obstacle thing is irrelevant because that was about there's an automatic tendency and there's nothing stopping it from working. Well, there's not even an automatic tendency here. So this is what he argues in the kind of in the general theory. Again, as I say, it's actually somewhat based on some other people's work that followed him, but nevertheless. Let's see, anything else about that? So he said it could stay here. It gets stuck here. There's no reason to expect it to move. We're already in equilibrium. We're already in equilibrium. Just because it's the intersection doesn't make it the equilibrium. Now, normally when we set analyses up, we try to make the intersection the equilibrium. But Keynes didn't make up this graph. He has a graph where the intersection is the equilibrium point. But this isn't his graph. He's like, this is your graph, and your graph sucks, is what he's saying. Your graph isn't capturing what's really going on. This is already equilibrium. So that is the beginning of Keynes's economics and post-Keynesian economics. Post-Keynesian economics is called post-Keynesian. Well, I got to give you one more graph. Okay. The people who had come from the classical perspective and then read what Keynes said didn't pick up on his central message. This is what they thought he said. They thought he was saying this. And S and D. Let's create some involuntary unemployment. That's always fun. W sub 0. n sub 0, n sub 1. Here's our really sad people. Because they don't have jobs and they want to work at W sub 0. All right, this is what the interpreters of Keynes thought he was saying, and I'm going to give you a couple of things here in a minute to highlight why they might have thought that. Ooh, did I put it in this too? I may have. Good for me. This is what they thought he was saying. They were saying, oh, and these are the Keynesians. The Keynesians are the ones who basically combined what they were thinking in the first place with a little bit of Keynes. But really, it has a lot more in common with this than it does with this. The Keynesians figured, there's an automatic tendency towards full employment, but there's an obstacle. That they would like to offer to work for less. The wages would like to come down. But we've got things like minimum wage laws and explicit and implicit contracts, trade unions. We've got real world factors that are preventing it from falling, even though that's what would solve the problem. Real world factors are preventing it from falling. And Keynes is like, that's not what I said. I was trying to get rid of the auto tendency. That was the big deal. But have you ever watched SpongeBob as an adult and noticed very different things that were funny now that you're an adult relative to when you were a little kid? Your frame of reference affects what you notice. And so when these people are reading his book, and I've got a couple of quotes here. Let's see here. Okay. When these people are reading his book, let me show you here. And oh man, I meant for it to skip ahead. All right, I have to go through these pages. Oh, I will show you that real quick. That's kind of interesting. There's a plot of the percentage of votes for the Nazis in the Reichstag and unemployment in Germany. And it, not right on top of each other, but you can see as things got worse and worse there after 1927 or so, the increased votes for the Nazis. And here we go. Is the problem rigid wages? Is it that Keynes is saying, no, there's an automatic tendency, but it's just being blocked? Well, this is a quote from the general theory. In addition to frictional unemployment, the postulate is also compatible with voluntary unemployment due to a refusal or inability of a unit of labor as a result of legislation or social practices or yada, 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 to accept a reward corresponding to the value, in other words, to accept a lower wage. So he's recognizing in this chapter on labor markets that it is possible for there to be things that represent an obstacle to wages falling. He said, yeah, right, that certainly is true. And when you're reading this book from this perspective, that's what you notice. That's what jumps out at you. You're like, oh, okay. All right, fair enough. Not that people didn't already know that, which was also one of the criticisms that the guys, we already knew that. And he said, well, that's because it's not what I was saying. Because he then says a couple of pages later, the contention that the unemployment which characterizes a depression is due to a refusal by labor to accept a reduction in wages is not clearly supported by the facts. It is not very plausible to assert that unemployment in the United States in 1932 was due to either labor obstinately refusing to, So he's saying, look, and let me show you that unemployment again. In 1932. And remember, there's no unemployment, there's no welfare. He's saying in the general theory, you're trying to tell me that in 1932 people were refusing to work for less? He said, no, they weren't. He says, and unions are the weakest, and labor is the most willing to negotiate when unemployment is high, and it had never been that high before. And it was about to get even higher. So Keynes is like, that's not what I said. So his book comes out in 36, right? And honestly, this isn't even the main focus of the book, really. We have to go in a different direction, which we will do here in just a minute. But he's saying, He did. Well, okay. Let's say that you are the manager of the Texas Rangers and you believe that you need better pitching. And you're talking to the owner of the team about why you think you need better pitching. And the owner disagrees about the why, but agrees with you that we should get better pitchers. Are you going to spend all day long trying to make them believe your version of why you need them? Or are you going to say, cool, well, we'll get some better pitchers? Because they're agreeing with you on the policy. They're just disagreeing with you on the reasons for it, all right? Well, that's what Keynes is running into here. Though both of those lead to it's not going to fix itself. We're going to have some sort of government intervention, which the Japanese help with tremendously, or it's not going to get better. And so that was one aspect. In fact, I think one of the reactions he wrote was something along the lines of, well, I guess that's one way you could think about it. But you have to also bear in mind that Britain goes to war on September 3rd, 1939, after the Germans invaded Poland on September 1st. And he's part of the government. And he's the one trying to figure out the finances for the war. He's kind of busy. He doesn't spend a lot of time publishing during this period. And then he dies in 46. Right after the war's over, he dies. So there were people who really thought what he said was much more relevant than either of these two, and that we should continue pushing in that direction. And for a while, there was open discussion among these people. But these people got frustrated. And they said, they're not listening. We could waste all our energy arguing, or we could use our energy to work on new ideas within our school of thought. And that's what they decided to do. And so I think it's 1975, the Journal of PostKeynesian Economics starts. And they called themselves post-Keynesians. Why? Well, in one sense, Keynesian would have made a lot more sense, right? I'm a follower of Keynes, therefore I'm a Keynesian. But it was already taken. Somebody had already taken it, and a group of people that these people thought, didn't really know what they were talking about. So I don't know why. I looked back the other day to find out, and I tried to figure out why. They were, in the very first issue of the Journal of PostKeynesian Economics, they try to say something about, well, we're trying to be sort of broadly accepting of many views after Keynes. But the main thing that they did was extend Keynes's vision, extend the analysis that he had put forward. Hey, going back to Kuhn, we've got an anomaly here. That the classical model is not explaining why the unemployment won't go away, but there is a revolution, but it just kind of sputters off a different direction. And these people really just basically continued the same direction they already were with a slight adjustment. But so this is how I like to explain why Keynes and Keynesian are not the same thing, and why you can imagine this would have happened. You're coming from this perspective, and it's really hard to think outside of what you've been researching and reading and so forth for 20, 30, 40 years, all right? And so you're reading this from this perspective, and you see that. And so modern Keynesians are not followers of Keynes. Modern post-Keynesians are followers of Keynes. But modern Keynesians are really, and in fact, the more proper name for Keynesians is neoclassical Keynesians, right? They are neoclassical Keynesians. They are Keynesians. They are people who combined those two schools of thought. Joan Robinson, who was a very famous economist who was also a contemporary of Keynes and a post-Keynesian, she called it bastard Keynesianism. Uh-oh, this is my daughter from Arizona. Pardon me. J.T. Harvey. What a coincidence that I should get a phone call from Arizona that wasn't my daughter, and then a few minutes later get a phone call from Arizona that was my daughter who had a flat tire. So she was making sure it was okay to use the roadside assistance that we've already paid for. It's like, yeah, go ahead. All right, so let's see here. Yeah, Joan Robinson called these bastard Keynesians because what they had created was the bastard offspring of these two schools of thought right here. And so she could be a kind of dirty mouth there, so don't repeat that kind of stuff in a polite company. So that's our first starting point here, is where did post-Keynesian economics come from? It came from the people who were left over after this revolution was aborted. and thought we should have gone this direction. What he said made more sense, and instead of this direction. And, well, gosh, I only ended up doing like a minute after Meg called. I'm going to stop right there and do the next video in a minute on the characteristics of post-Keynesian economics. Thank you.